Cruise ship workers at Reddit, what was the biggest shits moment on the boat that luckily passengers didn't find out about at all? Water pipe burst in a storeroom and soaked all of the spare toilet paper. This was on day 2 of a 14-day voyage to Antarctica. The cabin stewards had to swap around rolls of paper between low-use and high-use guest cabins, and it came right down the wire. None of the guests found out or realized. Now toilet paper is hidden in every cabin instead of a centralized location. Currently working on a ship sailing out of Nick. Just a few months ago we had a passenger go through a breakup with his girlfriend over the phone while on board. He went to his mother's cabin, told her goodbye, and before anyone could do anything about it he ran up to deck 15 and jumped about 150 feet into the water. The rescue boats searched for hours and never recovered the body. Everyone assumed he got sucked under the ship and into the propulsion system. Protocol is not to tell other passengers more than they need to know in the event of an emergency. So we all had to keep quiet. Also on decks TT-1 through 2 there are a bunch of watertight doors that divide up the different compartments that have several tons of force behind them when closing. They will stop at pretty much nothing when set to close. We once had a contracted mechanic on board doing some temporary work and he dropped a tool on the wrong side of a closing watertight door. He reached back to grab it and his arm proceeded to get stuck and the door closed on his shoulder. Totally sliced off his arm and he bled out and died before someone found him. Hubs and I went on the Oriana to the top of Norway for our honeymoon this February-March. Thoroughly recommended. But when we were in outer, some 70 north, it was -15 during the day and got down to -27 both nights we were there. Pretty cold. In fact so cold that the poor old girl had her pipes freeze. The electrics go out, they were cooking lunch in the dark using guys with torches. Captain Gray even said later that he checked Oriana's logs and she'd never endured colder than -10 in outer before then. Then worse as we were heading back south and hit the North Atlantic current, which was -6 and so melted all those frozen pipes. Some flights of stairs and a little mini buffet were closed because of water damage and they did say on disembarkation if you're a plumber, please stay. My housemate's sister works for Carnival and mentioned to me they'd had an emergency meeting about Oriana's predicament. My dad worked on a cruise liner in the 80s. When it was in the Falklands as a troop carrier it was nearly sunk by a French Exocet missile fired by the Argentinians. I believe it was closer than 100 meters before it was destroyed. Another time one of the engineers discovered a fire in the engine room. And so as not to cause too much of a panic by sounding the alarm he ran around the middeck shouting "Sifi in the main engine room and then ran back downstairs. Finally another fire was once discovered by a boiler technician who, whilst not on duty and drunk, put it out with his makeshift male firefighting equipment. I want to preface this by saying I never confirmed this myself but was general consensus by most of the crew. Used to work on cruise ships. Generally we leave ports of call around 4 or 5. Never really staying later than that due to port regulations. One night, we had a surprise late night at a port. All the passengers and most of the crew had a wonderful time. It was a port of call with a very active nightlife. I was part of the last groups coming back to the ship and noticed a few men in scuba suits entering and leaving the water. Large machinery in the water off the stern of the ship sporadically lighting up. Almost like someone was welding underwater. A few days later I was in the mess hall and heard that the ship underwent heavy maintenance to repair an area taking on water. Heard this one from a friend who worked the cruise ships in the 80s sauce. So it was one of those mainly senior citizen cruises. And an older gentleman passed away while lying on one of the outside sunks. Luckily, one of the officers was first to notice, and quickly called over 2 South American staff members, whose English was less than perfect, and he tells them, "Get rid of that quick before anybody sees it." The officer meanwhile tracks down the gentleman's sauce partner, and after consoling her through her grief, she asks to see the body. He takes her to the refrigerator where they keep people who pass away, and it's sauce empty. He calls the ship's doctor, who knows nothing about anybody. Now furious, The officer hunts down the 2 staff members who moved the body. He finally finds them. And goes ballistic. Where the hell is that body? So they look at each other. And one says. So y'all say get raid. We get raid. So the officer is now confused. So what are you talking about? Sin answer. The man makes a throwing over the railing motion. In hindsight. I wish Assad asked my friend what they told his wife. I was a passenger and was shooting the shit with one of the crew members late at night. He told me that on an earlier cruise someone had died in a hot tub the first night out of port and people didn't know for hours. He managed to stay propped up and his sunglasses helped hide it. Several passengers entered the hot tub during the time and assumed he was antisocial for whatever reason. The crew discovered him when they were closing the pool area for the night. They moved the body downstairs to the morgue. None of the passengers except the Guisos family found out about it. My oh shit moment was when I was hired for a ship on 2-day notice, trombone player. When I got on the ship I found out that I was replacing a guy who had just died in a jet skiing accident in Nicaragua. Everyone in the crew knew it, and the last cruise's passenger knew it, and the entire band that I was joining was obviously traumatized. In the end, it ended up being my favorite contract. But the first few weeks were difficult for everyone. R.I.P. Bone Guy. I never knew you. But I know they all loved you. We were on a family cruise and after a wonderful dinner we were trying to get back to our room. As we got to our floor and headed down the hallway there was a new dead end. A wall had appeared that separated us from our room. We were told we had to go the opposite way and go around another hall on the other side of the boat. As we walked we noticed many new walls. Once we got to the other side the floor was wet and one of the new walls was leaking water from behind it. It took us 20 minutes to navigate the newly built out labyrinth. We were so worried we were taking on water we could barely sleep that night. I haven't worked on a cruise. But I did go on a Disney cruise in February. Obviously we knew this happened. Since I can tell the story. As an aside. The cruise was amazing and even though Disney cruises cost more, ours was entirely done with rewards points. The ship never had lines for anything and the staff was beyond incredible. Anyway. A small electrical fire broke out in a cabin down the hall from us. It's jolting being woken up on a cruise by a general alarm and opening the cabin door to see a crewman sprinting down the hall with a fire extinguisher. The ship's captain quickly walked past as well, with a couple officers flanking him. A few minutes later they had crews stationed throughout the ship's halls, explaining to everyone what had happened and that everything was fine. The family that had been in the cabin got moved elsewhere and at the next port it seemed like they brought in extra people to clean the floor to remove the smell. It was mild anyway. Fires on ships are scary. And the response is always immediate and probably proportionally larger than it needs to be. My father was a firefighter on his cruiser when he was in the Navy. And he had similar stories. Ships don't fuck around when it comes to fire. My buddy is right next to me. We work on boats together but he used to work on a cruise ship. This is what he says. I have plenty of oh shit moments but I'll give you my biggest oh shit moment. So we were stuck in the locks of Amsterdam for over 4 hours and no indication of what's going on. After a few HRS had passed the captain came on the PA system and the reason we didn't leave was because there was a live mine from World War II 1 kilometer from the front of the ship. Sorry I'm on mobile and had to condense the dialogue. My buddy worked in the theater on a cruise ship and always had fun stories from traveling around. Cool thing. Beers are less than $1 in the crew bar. Bad thing. You always have to be sober enough to operate a lifeboat and man your station during an emergency. Crew members getting left in countries because they were off getting drunk and chasing cute locals. Old people dying and being put in a freezer on a low deck near one of their storage areas. Good times. I used to be a crew member. And one time a guy working at the front desk jumped overboard after a crew party. He was found a few hours later by the Coast Guard. And everybody was asked to be discreet in order to keep the cruise running smooth. And everything was fine until the captain came on the PA and said we were delayed because a crew member jumped overboard. Then the madness begins. Rumors appear out of nowhere. And the rest of the cruise was pretty much guests asking what happened the whole time. A lot of shit happens on board. I could write a book. Maybe even more than one. Another time a guy committed suicide in his cabin. And his family was on board. Including a little girl. But this time it didn't leak to the guests. I saw the family as they were being escorted to the security office. Felt so bad for them. A friend of mine got fired for getting wasted. Got pissed and starting peeing all over his cabin while the security guys were there to take care of him. He spent the night in the little jail on board before being dumped the next day in whatever port we were. Also, every time we had ice cream at the crew restaurant, people would say it was because I had to empty the freezer to put a dead body. I work on cargo ships, but I've trained with cruise ship workers, so I've heard a few stories. I read your comment below, and generally the news only picks up on accidents on ships if it's a major accident involving a lot of people. So pretty much only cruise ships, and luckily besides the Costa Concordia it's pretty rare these days. I do know that they have codes when speaking about incidents though, so to not alarm passengers. For example, if someone is hurt dead, quite common. If you have a heart attack at sea, then your chances suck, and they need to call for help via tannoy. They will use a code so the passengers don't know what they are talking about. Also, as someone else mentioned, certain cruise companies that attract older passengers have a separate fridge for bodies because getting through a trip without a death is not so common. Well, all the passengers found out. But on a QM2 transatlantic crossing, one of the kitchen staff got drunk one night and hurled himself overboard in the North Atlantic. The ship basically found out the next morning when the first mate kept calling on the ship-wide intercom for him to go to his post. That afternoon, the captain announced what happened and that the ship was turning around to, with the help of 3 nearby merchant ships, try to search for him. Of course it was foggy as hell and you couldn't see 100 yards, but just about everyone was on the railings with binoculars trying to search for the poor guy. A wedding even stopped on board. The whole party out looking once the announcement came that we were in the search area. After, shockingly, nothing was found. The concierge desk set up a multinational currency donation box to send to his family back in Chile. There were 4 days left in the trip at that point, and every day that box was stuffed to capacity. I hope it helped them. I was playing a production show, guitar, was standing on stage with a wireless unit alone to play Purple Rain. And then all of a sudden the house lights came on and the curtains closed. Everyone in the audience looked at me. And I ran off the stage. Turns out a sewage pipe burst backstage and there was shit everywhere. Show was cancelled and the passengers didn't find out why. Ship just arrived in Whittier, Alaska, the port for Anchorage, and an elderly passenger dropped dead while walking down the gangway. A conflict ensues between the port security and the ship's medical team. The port security didn't want the ship's medical team to get involved because it technically happened off the ship and the local authorities had jurisdiction. There really was no saving the guy, but the ship's medical team at least wanted to try, but the local authorities wouldn't even allow the chief medical officer to start CPR. The coroner had a 6-hour eater, so the port authorities bagged up the body and stuffed it in an X-ray machine storage container in port, guarded by local police, until the coroner could arrive to take the body to Anchorage. The wife of the deceased continued on to finish the vacation for the 7-day rail trip to Denali. It was a 14-day gimmick. 7 days at sea. 7-day scenic rail trip. My understanding was the cruise line calmed her entire vacation, arranged for the remains to be returned home at no cost to her, and provided a personal escort assistant for the remainder of her vacation. We were sailing from Hawaii to San Francisco to dry dock and make repairs to our ship, when a propeller crapped out a day and a half into what should have only been 7 days at sea. So it added a day and a half to the voyage. People were panicking. Everyone thought we were going to run out of food. Until the captain reminded everyone we had enough food for a month at sea. And if it was any longer, some perishables might spoil. But they could fly in supplies in an emergency if needed. We arrived in San Francisco with no more delays. Anticlimactic, I know. On a side note, watching a giant cruise ship getting lifted out of the water to dry dock is surreal as hell. Also, sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge and looking up from the 13th deck was super surreal. I was hoping the whole time we were going to clear it. It was probably only about 50 feet above my head. I was on a Carnival ship in the Caribbean in October 2011. We had a cabin with a balcony. A luxury I have not purchased since. Anytime I went out on my balcony I got choked by cigarette smoke. Because the tenants next door were smoking out on their balcony. Against ship rules. They were kind of redneck trash in addition. So their behavior did not surprise me. After one of our stops, 2 of the 4 guests in that cabin left the ship. And we did not at first find out why. The 2 who remained were much more subdued after that. No partying. No loud talking and thankfully less smoking. Before we got to port, the word got around that our next door neighbors had a pregnant woman amongst the floor. She delivered a baby into the bathroom toilet. And then left the ship to go party ashore with her cabin mates. Naturally room service found the corpse in the toilet while they were off the ship. And the woman was arrested immediately upon her return. They kept her there on the island because the baby died outside US jurisdiction. A young female passenger reported being coerced into sex with a ship worker. She told her father. And the FBI were involved to investigate since she was underage. The young man being questioned, originally from India, couldn't bear facing his family after his dismissal. He hung himself below Redx. Before the girl admitted to her father she had consented and the father dropped the charges. They found him. He hung himself below deck in the engine room as they were looking for him to tell him everything was alright and he wasn't being fired and sent home. Sort of off topic a bit, but on our last cruise with my family, my aunt began asking our waiter questions about things that happened on ship. He said that there was one time when a drunk guy fell off the side of the ship, but I guess his family or whoever he was with didn't know of his whereabouts till the next day. He said they didn't know what to do or where they would go for him since they didn't know he fell off, nor does he know whatever they did to help search. Pretty sad to be honest if you just fall off the side of a ship and nobody knows if you're house or gone. Oh, I got one. So I worked on a cruise ship during a particular rough cruise. If I remember correctly, we left Nassau early to try and beat the storm back to port. Long story short, we didn't beat it. We got caught in huge 30-50 foot swells. Some dishes broke and water managed to get up onto deck 4, but other than that, no alarms raised. The next day however, we all went to breakfast and noticed the mess was unbearably hot. For some reason the AC wasn't operating in crew areas. After a few weeks, the truth spread that during the storm, water from the pool leaked down the elevator shaft and caused a fire in the AC room. It was contained, but no alarms were raised. I guess they didn't want to scare the passenger anymore. But it was freaky for crew to realize that even we weren't among the first to know if shit was really going down. Working as an engineer on cruise ship, the most common oh shit moment literally was when you find out that the sewage plant line is not functioning as intended. Most usual suspects were sanitary pads, tampons, condoms and food items which were flushed down the drain by the passengers despite them being briefed that none of those things should be disposed via the ship pot. Imagine. More than 5,000 passengers. Clogged pipelines. So much shit one should go through to exactly locate where the clog is, and then next day will be the same shit again. Oh shit. Literally. One time we were sailing on the Mediterranean Sea and we heard Oscar over the speakers. For those who don't know, Oscars means man of sea. Some crew members got scared, me, and you could see officers going up and down on the ship. We as crew had to look out of the windows just in case we were able to spot something. And we were not able to tell passengers what was going on. In the end it turned out to be a false alarm. Someone had prank called the bridge. I worked on a cruise ship in Hawaii that was cursed from the start. Brought into Driddock for a Mackie over a year ahead of schedule because another ship planned to come out that year sank at the dock in Germany. Construction was rushed and mistakes were made. Hiring practices did not take into consideration cultural differences and there was a huge conflict between the company's hotel offices and the hotel staff. Upon arrival in Hawaii from San Francisco most of the crew quit, leaving the ship extremely undermanned. The company in its infinite wisdom decided to continue with planned cruises instead of filling its crew levels back up and taking a short financial hit. The same jobs still have to be done whether or not there is enough crew. So we did the best we could, but 300 crew doing the work of 1000 crew just doesn't work. When people are tired, mistakes get made. We had lots of fires and accidents and injuries. We worked hard and played hard, making the best of a bad situation. Every cruise there was always some sort of major emergency that need to be kept quiet. Sometimes that's easier said than done. We had a Navy helo come in and medevac 2 tourists that had been snorkeling and gotten run over by their dive boat. One lost a leg and another an arm. We got them out of the water and treated and up to the helipad for evac. All the passengers knew was that what they couldn't see was the inner stairwells, elevators and crew covered with blood. We saved both their lives that day. Numerous fires of various causes with multiple victims. Heart attacks, diabetes, comas, assaults, murders, suicides, we have seen it all. This was shits in the sense that it was shocking for us. I worked as a musician in the house band that backed up the variety shows. One night our piano player didn't show up to the first show of the night, which was totally unlike him. We played a show without him, thinking maybe he had fallen asleep and not set an alarm. About halfway through, the show was interrupted with a general announcement over the ship's SOS intercom. Scode Alphas, medical emergency, followed by his room number. We were told after the show that he had died. The cause was later determined to be a heart attack. The whole band was in disbelief, and still had to play 2 more shows that night. There was never an announcement made to the passengers about it, but I'm sure some found out through gossip. There's this family that shows up like every other year, and their daughter is one of those big girl flirty drunks. Well, last year her and I guess a friend were at a club that we have, and she was grinding on some guy when I noticed her tampon just fell out. No one noticed somehow besides me. And to save her from embarrassment, I grabbed my big ass broom that we do broad sweeps with after everyone leaves and made the excuse that I had to clean the area they were dancing on. I did a quick sneaky sweep of the area and got the tampon under the broom so no one could see it. Safely disposed of it and went on with my life. Later that night she came to the bar area and sat down. I was sitting right next to but kinda behind her, and saw she was texting someone called hubby about how she was in her room getting ready for bed. So then I felt really bad because I just went out of my to help her cheat and not be embarrassed. Poor guy. I worked on a river cruise ship in Oregon on the Hood River. The majority of our passengers were elderly. Well, one of our passengers was on meds that you don't mix with alcohol. Apparently she had a whole bottle of wine with dinner and afterwards went to her cabin to shower and passed out from the mixture and cracked her head open. Her room flooded from her body, clogging the shower drain, and it leaked into the hall. When we finally got in, she was dead and we had to do an emergency landing to get her off. As a deckhand, I had to help the paramedics bring her body off the ship, and it was seriously traumatizing knowing there was a dead person right in front of me and the only thing separating us was a foot of air and a body bag. We quarantined all passengers to the bar on the aft side of the boat and brought her out on the fore gangway, and the passengers were told there was an emergency, but that's it. I have a lot of oh shit moments from my days on the ship. My parents were passengers, and they all did find out. But they were on that Carnival cruise ship where the engine caught fire some odd years back. They always tell the story about how their waiter before everything went to shit was the nicest, happiest dude on the ship and was really cool. But once the engine went out and everyone was scared, he apparently could be found smoking on the top deck and was very unapproachable. They said he was either very terrified or just really pissed off about the whole situation, and his entire demeanor changed to the point that he was basically a whole different person. Just wanted to share something that I assume many passengers don't really realize. Our waiter, for a different trip, told us about how typically they are hired to be out at sea for months at a time. Though it's not constant work. Seems like common sense. But when you see your same waiter there a few years later on your next trip, it really makes you think about how much of their life they're spending away at sea.